Hi everybody. I'm going to wait just a minute until a few people come on. It's just 8:30. And a bunch of things to talk about, but let me just introduce who I am. I'm Nero Feliciano. If you don't know me and you're seeing this video later. Hey everyone. Hi Carly. Hi Rebecca. Hi Lena. Thanks for joining. A lot of things to talk about tonight, and I'd love for this to be a conversation, not just me talking. So I welcome your comments, questions. It'd be great if we had a discussion. Even I can read your comments, but a lot to talk about, and I'm actually going to get started now. So originally we were going to do this video, myself, Amy Julia Becker, and another friend of mine who's a therapist, Black female, and we decided not to do the video. And part of that was because my friend who's Black, who's a therapist, wrote to me and she said, Nero, I'm really exhausted. I'm exhausted. And when I was talking to her about her experiences, they actually sounded like a lot of my Black female friends. So I wanted to share that with you. One, I think this is a time for many Black people, especially if you're a Black parent right now, where you need to put on your own oxygen mask and not worry about the rest of us. It is not their job to educate us about what's going on in the world and how to deal with it. And for that reason, I decided to do this video because I'm not as exhausted. And there's a reason why I'm not as exhausted, even though I am a person of color. Even though I have experienced discrimination, even though I do worry for my son and my family members who are Black. We have many people in our family, Sri Lankans, who have married Black people and who have children who are biracial but are Black to the outside world. I worry for my friends, and I worry for our country. You know, Black people have been a victim of this treatment, of these crimes, but these are not just crimes against Black people. They are really crimes against humanity. I mean, this is the world our kids are growing up in. They have just been the victims of them. And the reason why I'm willing to continue to talk and ask questions, like I said, I'm not as tired. Although I'm a person of color, I have a very different history here. It's very different when you come to this country by choice, looking for opportunity, versus being kidnapped and brought in a way that was brutal and cruel against your will. We don't share the same history, and we don't share the same history of dehumanization. And because of that history, because of something called implicit bias, something I talked about on my podcast on Sunday, there are different thoughts, both explicitly and covertly, about people coming from other cultures who are not Black, but people of color, versus Black people. Now, when it comes to explicit racism, and I think about my son, and I think about my male cousins who are tall and dark, have they experienced a lot of the same treatment? Will they experience a lot of the same treatment? Yeah, because when you're racist, you're not stopping to really look at the differences between maybe a tall, dark Indian in a hoodie versus a tall, dark Black person in a hoodie. That just represents a threat. But I really feel that this is an important conversation for us to have, because all of us who are not exhausted right now need to carry this work. Like I said, it is not the job of Black people to educate us. It is our job to figure that out. So there have been questions that have brought to me this week that I want to talk about and share with you. But I want to talk about my friends, especially my Black friends who are mothers, who are exhausted. A lot of my Black friends are mothers. And I just want you to think about this for a minute. When we got thrown into COVID, think about how we felt as mothers. We were thinking about the uncertainty of it, how to protect our children in it, how to explain to them what was going on, something really big and scary that could affect them and their life. Now, with COVID, we know that this is time limited. I mean, maybe it's going to take a year, or maybe it's going to take 2 years, but we're going to come up with a vaccine. We're going to come up with a treatment. There's going to be an end to it at some point. Now imagine if you've just gone through that with your kids. You've just seen them go through this huge transition, experience the fear and the uncertainty and the life change from it. And now you're trying to explain this to them. And that's the position a lot of my friends have been in. Not only that, and I've heard this from non-Black people of color as well, having this happen, having all these issues come up right now, has brought back memories of other experiences we've gone through. I've been told to go back to my country before, as our president has mentioned to the 5 congresswomen. I've been told that too in my lifetime, even though I was born here. I was born in Brooklyn. But experiences come back, and for some people, especially my Black friends, there's a lot of re-traumatization going on right now. Other wounds that are now opened again that they're having to deal with. And not only that, they're dealing with the emotions they're feeling with their kids. I had a conversation with my friend who's going to talk to me today, and her family was not in a good place. They were talking about these things, and I understand why you would not be in a good place. I can't imagine having some of the conversations that some of my friends are having with their kids. I've had other conversations with my family, but I also understand the fact that my husband is white. That's one less thing I have to worry about. He's Puerto Rican, but he's white. I have 1 Black son. I don't have 3 like some of my friends. The worry is exponential in those cases. And some of the conversations they've been having with 11-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds is how to be safe. The questions these kids are asking is how do I reconcile my identity with needing to look more white so that I can be safe in this world? Can you imagine for a mother to answer those questions? We don't have answers. They're asking, is life worth living if this can happen? And why can't I be the person freely that God created me to be? These are some of the questions kids are asking. And I don't think any parent should have to answer that question, should have to have these conversations. Is life worth living? So on top of trying to work their regular jobs, deal with COVID in this pandemic, and now take on the emotional stability of their family as mothers do when it's just been intensified tenfold. What I'm seeing as a therapist, and you may have experienced this in COVID, we weren't just anxious in the moment. We're anxious in the moment. I mean, can we go out? Are we going to get sick? Are we going to get the illness? But we experienced something called anticipatory anxiety. And that is anxiety where your mind goes to the future. And actually, that's a lot of anxiety. But the what ifs, what if this can happen? Now, for Black people, that is always there. We talk to our kids and we train our kids young to be aware of situations that can be dangerous. And some of us have to have very different conversations than others. I posted a video today on my story about how Black parents talk to their children about what to do when they get pulled over at a very young age. We've had this conversation with my son as well since he was 10. So there's a lot of anticipatory anxiety. And unlike COVID, right now there's no cure for it. There's no cure. And what I'm seeing is a sense of hopelessness in a lot of my friends, a sense of exhaustion. Some of these friends, they are professional, masters, educated doctors that have canceled their work to stay home, and they're in bed with their kids and they're crying. Their kids are crying, and they are crying with them because it's raw and it hurts. People are not sleeping right now. A lot of my friends are so exhausted they're not sleeping. And I can tell you this one story. A friend of mine's child was not sleeping very well. She's younger than high school, middle school. And she got on a Zoom call with her teacher the next day. And her teacher looked at her and said, "Why are you so tired?" And this child, Black, beautiful girl, said to her teacher, "Well, we haven't been sleeping that well because of the events surrounding George Floyd. And her teacher looked at her and said, well, that doesn't really involve you. You really need to be prepared when you come to class. I had no words. I mean, right now, with everything going on, that was the teacher's response. So my friend intervened, ended the call, and said, please have the principal call me. She's done for the day, maybe for the year. But these are the things that become more exhausting on top of what they're already dealing with right now. These situations. Exactly. I know. My friend's like, what? Yes, this happened today. I'm going to talk about what it means to get involved in this, what you can do, because there's a little bit of confusion on what you can do. I want to tell you that doing this work is hard. And if you're white and you're watching this, it's hard, and there's many levels of it. And I'm going to tell you this right now because you need to expect this. I've had this happen to me too. When you get into anti-racist work, when you start having these discussions, you are going to lose friends. There are friends that this is going to make very uncomfortable having these conversations. There are friends who do not like to have these conversations. You are going to lose friends. I had a friend of mine tell me she was trying to have these conversations. They were talking about their kids and exposing them to race. And the friend responded, here in my town, I don't believe any of this is about race. I'm just going to teach my kids to be kind and see everybody as equal. Now, that's coming from a good place, but it's denying difference. I think many of us probably who've tuned in know that colorblindness is not the answer here. We want to celebrate difference, but we also want to honor experience and struggle so that we can end it. If we don't acknowledge it, we can't end it. So that was something I definitely wanted to talk to you about. So this is why I think it's important for us to have these conversations. And I know one of the questions I got earlier today or comments rather, that white people are feeling a little bit anxious on how to navigate this. There was somebody who's saying, we're cautious about what we need to say because it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable. It is still easier than being a Black person doing this work. And I'm going to post an article from the Washington Post that talks a little bit about that. Your friends, you might have friends who no longer want to hang out with you when you start having these conversations. Part of this work starts at home. I talked about that on the podcast today because racist perceptions and thoughts happen very young. They happen innocently, but they develop into racist thoughts that can be pretty harmful. So one of the things I wanted to put out there, if you are interested in doing this anti-racist work, if you're interested in fighting this, and family, absolutely right, Karina, and family, it starts in the family. I want to ask you, do you have friends of color? Do you have Black friends? Do you have people of other ethnicities that are actually your friends, not your token person? Oh, I know that person, right? Because I've definitely been that person for different people. But are these people you invite in your home, that you've gotten to know their families, that you've made relationships with? That is so important in this work. And it's important because then you'll have someone who in vulnerability you can go to and say, hey, I don't know if I'm getting this right, but I want to help. I love you. I want to say the right thing. I want to fight against this. Can you listen to me? I have Black friends that I talk to before I post anything about racism, because I understand I'm looking at it through my worldview, which is different than theirs, even though we're both people of color. Like I said on my podcast, we have Venn diagrams that have overlaps, for sure. But our experience, our history, the history of dehumanization, the struggles both of our people have gone through have been different. The perceptions about us are different. So I want to make sure that I am informed and educated about it. One thing I want to address is a friend of mine who brought me this question, and she was talking about white people feeling shame. She was also talking about someone saying that they were feeling that they were being shamed. that white people were being shamed. You should post. You should not post. You should speak up. You should be silent. And some other things were in that post. And I just want to differentiate. There is a difference between being shamed and feeling shamed. No one is trying to shame white people now. What people of color and black people are doing right now is we're making people aware of the reality that has existed for a long time. We now just have it on video. That is not shaming anyone. It is making people aware of what different people do to black people, what has happened to black people. If you are feeling shame, you need to untangle that from the idea that you're being shamed, because that is a separate issue. If you're feeling shame, you need to go visit my girl Brene Brown and read about shame, because that is not what's being done to you. That is what you are feeling internally. So that is something that needs to be explored. I don't think anybody wants people to feel shame unless you've been a perpetrator of those acts intentionally. I think that what we have to do is figure out, how do we respond to this? And you know, as I have outlined before, one big thing is to become educated and become informed. Today I was talking to my husband, who's Puerto Rican. He grew up very poor. He's white. And he said when he was going through school, he said, he was speaking with a group of minorities with a professor. And what that professor said is, the best thing you can do right now is to get educated, because when you are educated, you will have more influence to make a difference. And we know this, knowledge is power. We don't need people going about this in ways that are not going to be helpful. The more you know, the more that you're informed, you can strategically work against this in the ways that are most effective. But you need that knowledge. You can't fight against something until you really know what you're fighting against. And we also have to understand our own contribution to the problem. Implicit bias, that is big. The ways in which we don't even realize that we are contributing to it. There's a couple studies I talked about in one of my podcasts. One was they gave physicians an implicit bias test, and they found that physicians who scored high on this implicit bias test, when they were speaking with black patients, they tended to dominate the conversation rather than listen to them compared to their white patients. Now, you can understand what that effect might have. Patients not feeling heard, patients not feeling seen, maybe a distrust, maybe a reluctance to go back to a physician or physicians in general. And then you can see how health-related issues can arise after that. Another group of physicians who scored high on the implicit bias test, and there's this test, there's a link to it on my podcast. I can post a link if anybody wants it. Is one of the ones that I used is from Harvard, and they give you results on different types of implicit bias. The one that was given to physicians also said that they were more likely to prescribe painkillers to white patients compared to black patients with the same issue. Now, this might not be something that they were even aware of, but it happened. There was another test that I talked about in the podcast that I heard from this talk that Anita Phillips, who's fantastic, gave, and she talked about preschool teachers. They gave a test to preschool teachers at Yale to look for bad behavior in a video. Now, the trick of this was there was actually no bad behavior in the video. And what they did was they used eye tracking technology to track the teacher's eyes. And repeatedly, the teacher's eyes first went to the black male student in that class. So somewhere there was a connection, even subconsciously, between bad behavior and black children. Now, when the teachers found out about this, they were absolutely horrified. If you think about preschool teachers, they're like the nicest people on earth. They're working with children. They have these huge hearts. They were horrified, and they wanted this study to be published so people understood the role of implicit bias. And again, you can see a trickle-down effect from that study. If you are constantly being watched, kids know there are kids who get away with things and kids who don't. And the kids who are watched constantly don't, because eventually you're going to see something. right? We have statistics show black kids are more often sent to the principal's office. They're more often expelled. And it could be the role of implicit bias that began the process. And then we're creating some sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you think of identity development, if you're constantly being called out for behavior, you're going to have a certain self-perception of yourself. I see this with kids who are diagnosed, black or white, with ADD a lot later in life, in high school. They say, I wish I knew this earlier, because they've already developed this perception about themselves that they're no good at school and they always get in trouble, when really it was something organic. Well, the same thing can happen with kids who have been called out because of implicit bias of a teacher, not knowing. Covert racism is still racism, and it's still powerful, it's still harmful. So there's ways all of us can find out how we've contributed to this issue. That is so important to know, and it's so important to be educated on this subject. There are a couple books. I mean, there's so many books and resources that people are throwing out there right now, but there's a couple that I recommend. One is my friend Amy Julia Becker's book, White Picket Fences, and the other is White Fragility. Two really good books to understand white privilege. And I think if you are a white person, you cannot begin this work unless you start with white privilege and understanding that. So just in that conversation that a couple friends have brought to me about what should white people do, one, for sure, learn about it, read articles. There's so many videos out right now. Follow some prominent black teachers, look at their voices, hear them, listen. There's a lot of listening, and repost their content. Repost the content from these black speakers and educators and teachers. That's going to be important. I think your own education is first in this. I think I've said that already. And then the other piece is form relationships with people of color, real relationships. Like, I'd invite you over for dinner and spend time with my family, and I'd enjoy being with you. And I want to learn from you, but I also want to have a friendship with you and get to know you as a person type relationships. I think that's so important for us. It's so important for our kids. We have to have these conversations with our kids, because it starts early, their biases. And I'm going to give you a quick example that I shared today on the podcast. I was talking to my youngest daughter, my 6-year-old Carolina, the other day. It was like a 30-year-old trapped in a 6-year-old's body, if you know her. And she's on this kick of wanting to do things for poor people, which, of course, we've helped out with in different organizations, so she's seen it. But there was a different affinity for it. And I said, where'd you get this from? And she said, well, we watched the movie Little Women, and there are poor people in the movie, and the girls were doing nice things, and I want to do that. I think that's really nice. So I said to her, okay, we can do that. I said, well, Carolina, what do poor people look like? And she said to me, well, they're dirty, and they wear dirty clothes. And my husband, Ed, was like, oh, he grew up poor. He didn't know where this came from. And I said, Carolina, why do you think poor people are dirty? And she said, because the poor people in that movie were dirty. All the poor people were dirty. And I said, honey, poor people can look just like us. They're not dirty. They don't wear dirty clothes. And she said, well, that's because we give them nice stuff. And I was trying to correct her in this and have the conversation. But do you see, if I never said anything, if we never had that conversation, that would be a perception that would stay with her for a long time based on her drawing her own conclusions from a movie. And you can imagine how that happens with race and kids. So they're really important conversations to have. So those were just a couple of the things that I wanted to talk about. And just to summarize, it's important that everybody educates themselves. That's one. And if you want to post about it, I would say talk about it. Talk about it. There are still people in this town that I live in Ridgefield, where they're doing great anti-racist work, who still believe racism does not exist in this town, who believe that we should be colorblind, and these conversations are too much for your kids. There are resources that show you how to talk to your kids at age appropriate levels. And I will post one of them when I post this link. It's never too young to start the topic of talking about differences. And we can talk about them very young in a celebratory way, But there's a certain age where we think kids are too young, but they're not. They already know. They've already picked up things. So it's important that we have those conversations. So to all my Black friends who are watching, know I love you. And I'm learning on my own, but I also want to continue to have the conversations. I think that's really important, you know, for white people who don't know what to say. Go to one of your friends of color and say exactly what I said before. Look, I love you. I'm horrified that this is happening. I want to be a part of stopping it. I don't want to raise my kids to grow up this way. I am not expecting you to teach me. I can learn on my own. There's enough out there. That is not your responsibility. But I would love the opportunity to talk about some things because I don't want to be offensive. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Everybody, please know we're all going to say the wrong thing. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to make mistakes. People of color that are not Black, we're making mistakes too. We're going to say things like that too. We have to have that expectation that we are, but we're not going to become a victim of those mistakes. We're not going to stop talking about it and make ourselves a victim because it's too hard or people aren't going to like it. We have to be willing to take that risk and then and talk to our friends and learn from each other. So that's really all I had to share on this little video. Any comments or questions? Talked about a lot. Talked about shame. Oh, I love that. I love that. She said, I'll give you grace. This is from one of my friends who's a person of color. I'll give you grace if you give me effort. Amen to that. Amen to that. Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like if people know you're trying, if people know your heart, if you allow them to see your vulnerability in it, it goes a long way. It goes a long way. They know you're trying. And the silence, you've heard it a million times, it is complicit in it. There's a silence that is intentional. And that's when you are silent because you are posting things that are going to help and educate other people from people who've walked that path, who've learned about it, who've experienced it. That's a different kind of silence. The not saying anything is a silence that we don't want right now. So, oh, you're welcome. Thank you for giving us the tools to have the tough conversations. Well, we're going to keep talking. And if you want more, there is going to be a virtual anti-racist rally in Ridgefield. I will post a link to that with various speakers. I am going to be one of them. My role is going to be talking about how to talk to your kids about this and the things that you should know. So thank you all for listening and thank you for watching. For those of you who are going to watch later, I hope that you have a good night. And thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for making the effort. And thank you for willing to be vulnerable in this and to be empathetic, to think about what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. Because I think that's what we need to keep going. Thank you, Darren. Yes, let's keep the conversation going. Lena and Carly. All right, I love all of you. Have a good night. Go kiss your babies for me. Bye.